On Monday morning, September 14th, 2015, at exactly 10 a.m., Rachel Johnson got a call from her mother, Susie Slanker. Her voice was tight. Her words hit like a cold wave. She said Rachel's sister hadn't called her since Friday. That was the day she told her they were heading up to their cabin for the weekend. The whole family. Her sister, her husband, the kids. The cabin sat off Highway 193 deep in Greenwood, Dorado County, California. They'd gone quiet. No calls, no texts. Their phones were off. They had already reached out to the local authorities, but Susie and her sister decided they couldn't just wait. They needed to see the place for themselves. They asked Rachel to come, and she didn't hesitate. As they drove toward the cabin, something in the air changed. Smoke. It was thick, sharp, like it had been sitting there for hours. It didn't feel random. It felt like a warning. And when the cabin finally came into view, Rachel's heart sank. She didn't even make it to the front door. A law enforcement officer flagged her down and told her to step out of the car. He asked who she was and who was with her. She told him. He said they had found remains inside, burned beyond recognition. She froze. Then she asked the question that had already started forming in her mind. How many? The answer made her knees weak. They didn't know. The bodies were too damaged to count. Rachel walked back to the car, every step heavier than the last. Her mind raced. Was it Adam, her sister's husband? Was it Gavin, the youngest? Or Nolan, her stepson? Or was it Molly, her sister? And if it was, what happened up there? While Rachel sat in the car trying to explain to her mother and aunt what she had just been told, her voice shook. That maybe someone in the family was gone, or worse, that maybe all of them were. Inside the scene, officers moved carefully through the scorched remains. They had spent 2 full days just waiting for the fire to cool enough to even step foot on the land. The flames hadn't just eaten the cabin. They had swept across 3 full acres. Nothing could be touched until it was safe. Now, with the smoke finally thinning, they began trying to piece it together. What happened here? The cabin had no electricity, no plumbing. It looked like the family had been working to restore it, which meant one thing. The blaze wasn't caused by faulty wiring. Could it have been the generator or a gas cylinder? They started to form theories, but none of them held for long. Then one investigator spotted something buried under ash. A small skull. It belonged to a child, and it had been struck by a bullet. In that moment, the case changed completely. This wasn't just a cabin fire anymore. This was the start of something far more chilling. Something that would leave the entire country stunned. And it was only the beginning. The moment they found the bullet lodged in the child's skull, everything changed. No more slow steps. No more waiting. This was no longer just a burned cabin. It was something far darker. Homicide investigators were called in. Investigator Joe Ramsey took over. He was sharp, focused. From the minute he stepped onto the scene, he started building the story. Even with the cabin completely destroyed. Even with the fire having swallowed almost every trace of evidence. But not everything was gone. There was one clue that stood out. A Dodge, parked just outside the burn zone. Worn out. Faded. But the license plate was still visible. That was all Ramsey needed. The name tied to the car and the property was Adam Buchanan. He had purchased this land just a year earlier, 19 acres, with a small cabin, a retreat for holidays and weekends. Right there, Ramsey had his first working theory. Maybe someone thought the place was empty. Maybe someone broke in. Maybe Adam's family showed up at the wrong time. It made sense. For about 5 minutes. Until the forensics team confirmed something else. 3 bodies. A man. A woman. A young child. But then another twist came out of nowhere. While one investigator searched through what was left of a trash bin, he found a fast food bag. Taco Bell. Inside it were 4 cups and a receipt. That meant one of 2 things. There was another body still buried in the ashes. Or the 4th person is the one responsible of all what happened to this family. That detail blew the theory wide open. There weren't just 3 people here. There were 4, which meant the person who did this may not have broken in. They may have come with the family. And if that's true, the real question becomes, who was the 4th cup for? While investigators pushed forward at the scene, another officer from Sheriff John DiAgostini's team had a different job. He had to tell the family what they had found, and that 3 people were confirmed gone. Rachel Johnson was the one who told them something important. If there were only 3 remains found, then Nolan, her sister's stepson, wasn't at the cabin. That meant he might still be alive. A team was sent immediately to the Buchanan home on Cambridge Drive in Benicia, California. When they knocked on the door, it opened slowly. A teenage boy stood in front of them, around 16. It was Nolan. They told him, as gently as they could. His family had passed away. The cause looked like foul play. Nolan looked stunned, frozen. But the officers weren't sure if it was the news or something else. He was holding a beer. It was a strange detail. He was a kid alone in a house. Maybe he made a bad choice, but his whole world had just collapsed. They couldn't blame him for that. They brought Nolan in for questioning, not as a suspect. More so, he wouldn't be alone, and to see what he knew. The first question came quickly. Why didn't you go to the cabin with your family? Nolan said he had homework, that someone needed to be home while the rest were away. Next question. Did anyone have a problem with your dad or Molly? Nolan said yes. They had a neighbor, a man who had argued with Adam more than once. Adam had seen him growing illegal plants in his yard and threatened to report him. That was enough for the investigators to take seriously. Now they had someone with motive. The more they checked Nolan's story, the more it lined up. The neighbor did have a background in construction. He had been competing with Adam's company for years. Ever since the economic crash in 2008, both of their businesses had been struggling. It made sense. The tension, the money, the threats. And then came one more piece that made the theory feel locked in. The neighbor was an immigrant, and during that time there had been a rise in deadly incidents linked to undocumented groups. The theory was simple. The neighbor lured Adam to the cabin to settle their feud. Things turned dark. He ended it, then torched the place to cover it up. It all seemed to fit. Joe Ramsey didn't waste time. He went to the neighbor's house himself, but what he found changed everything. The neighbor wasn't home. He wasn't even in the country. He had left more than a month ago, closed his business, cleared out completely. When Ramsey got in contact with him overseas, the man didn't deny the conflict. In fact, he confirmed it. He said his wife had talked to him about it, that Adam had been right. And before he left the country, he removed every illegal plant from his yard. He was planning to apologize. Investigators confirmed every part of his story, and just like that, the strongest theory they had collapsed. They were back to square one, but something still wasn't right. Something was missing, and Ramsey couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was closer than they realized. Joe Ramsey made the call to the neighbor while standing right outside his house. The man's wife was there listening. Nothing felt off. Everything checked out. But Ramsey's instinct wasn't ready to let go. Before leaving the area, he turned and looked across the street. There it was. Adam Buchanan's home. From a distance, something caught his eye. A Ford F-150 pickup parked in the driveway. Clean, solid, in good shape. But that raised a new question. If Adam owned that truck, why didn't he take it to the cabin? Why take the beat-up Dodge instead? Ramsey stepped closer. That's when he noticed something that didn't fit. The tires on the Ford were packed with dried mud. Not splashed, not just dirty. Caked. Why would the truck look like that if it hadn't been used recently? Had Adam taken it to the cabin before and not cleaned it? Or was there another reason altogether? Ramsey brought it up when he sat down with Nolan again. Why didn't your dad take the Ford? Nolan didn't flinch. Said the cabin didn't have power or water. Said his dad bought it cheap with plans to fix it up. And part of that meant moving rocks around. That's why he took the Dodge. It was a company truck, built for tough jobs. Seemed like a fair answer. Except there was a problem. At the cabin site right next to the Dodge was a trailer. A flatbed. Which meant Adam was hauling the rocks on the trailer. So why not use the Ford to pull it? Why choose the older truck when the newer one was parked right at home? That one detail cracked something open. There were too many small pieces not fitting. Ramsey knew it was time. He started the process to get a warrant to search both the home and Adam's construction company. But even that wouldn't be enough. Not unless he understood who Adam Buchanan really was. Who Molly McAfee was. What kind of life they lived. Because only by understanding their story could he begin to uncover the truth behind how it ended. And what secrets might still be hiding in that house. His name was Adam Buchanan. Born October 1st, 1978. From the start, he stood out. Even as a kid, there was something different about him. He was loyal to his family, especially to his father Howard, who worked in construction. That bond shaped everything. Adam was sharp, driven, a natural leader. The kind of person who knew exactly what he wanted. Giving up wasn't part of his language. After high school, he joined his father's business. But it didn't take long before he branched out and built something of his own. He called the company the Buchanans. Simple, family-focused, just like him. His work ethic was fierce. His reputation spread fast. Within a few years, people knew the name, trusted it. During that time, he got married and had a son, Nolan. But the marriage didn't last. In 2001, they split. People close to Adam said his wife didn't share his hunger for building something bigger. By 2002, his company was growing fast. New projects, more employees. He needed someone to manage the office. That's when he met Molly McAfee. She was 1 year younger, smart, composed. The kind of woman who could command a room without raising her voice. From the moment she walked in for the interview, he felt it. This wasn't just a hire. This was the beginning of something else. She was strong, ambitious, and warm. Everything that pulled Adam in. 6 months later, they were together. By 2004, they had a son, Gavin Buchanan. Gavin was just like his father. Family-oriented, gentle, always by Adam's side. Neighbors said they saw them out together constantly, working in the yard, playing, laughing. On the other hand, Nolan had grown into a polite, well-spoken teen. He was protective, especially of his younger brother. And he looked up to Adam like a hero. To anyone watching, they were the perfect family. In 2010, Adam rebranded the business, Buchanan and Sons. He told his boys this was their future, that one day the company would be theirs. But the good years didn't last. When the economic crisis hit in 2008, the housing market collapsed. Construction work dried up. Adam's company took a hard hit. They went from 35 employees to 5, and the business sank into over $35,000 in debt. That pressure changed him. At home, things got tense. The fights between Adam and Molly grew louder. Even Molly's mother later said she feared one of them might snap. Molly began keeping a journal, recording the arguments, the patterns, the things she didn't say out loud. Sometimes she left the house and stayed with her mom, but she always came back. She still believed in the man she married. She knew the pressure was warping him. Inside the house, the boys could feel everything shift. And one day Nolan asked his grandfather what was really happening at the company. The truth hit hard. The business was failing. They might have to shut it down. Nolan didn't take it well. He got angry. Said that was unacceptable. That they had to fix it. He didn't want to lose what they had built. He didn't want to lose the legacy tied to their name. But the pressure was building. And something inside that house was starting to break. What no one knew was just how far the cracks would go. The first stop was the house. The Ford truck was the first thing Ramsey wanted to look at. Photos were taken of the muddy tires. The hope was to match them to tracks at the cabin site. But there were no tracks left. The fire had erased everything. Next stop, the company. They searched everything, offices, files, desks. At first, nothing stood out. Until just as they were about to leave, one investigator noticed something. One of the surveillance cameras was angled toward the parking lot. He asked to see the footage. That changed everything. On screen was Adam. backing up the Ford truck, hooked to a trailer, loaded with rocks. That one image flipped the case, because Nolan had said Adam didn't take the Ford. He had said his father used the old Dodge. Why lie about that? Now every detail about Nolan started to look different. Staying home to protect the house? That didn't make sense. He had to know the neighbor he mentioned had left the country weeks ago. And when officers first told him what happened, he didn't act shocked. He acted off, like he wasn't surprised, like he was buzzed. The biggest red flag was the silence. Nolan hadn't called anyone in 3 days. He hadn't reported his family missing. It was Molly's mother who made the call. That silence said more than anything else. So now the case was taking a turn. Investigators called Nolan back in. But this time he wasn't coming in as a witness. When Nolan stepped into the interrogation room this time, the vibe was different. No soft tone, no calm seating. They placed him in the corner. A psychological tactic, meant to make the walls feel closer, and it worked. He shifted in his chair, avoided eye contact. The lead investigator spoke first. "We've got questions. We need straight answers. Someone ended your family's lives. Help us find out who." Nolan didn't speak. He just nodded. "What did you do on September 11th after your family left for the cabin?" Nolan replied that he hung out with his girlfriend and went to the movies. But this time the detective pressed harder. "What was the name of the movie?" That tiny question hit harder than expected. Nolan froze. He couldn't answer. Instead, he shifted the story. Said he went out driving with some friends. Didn't remember the movie. Just needed to get out of the house. That wasn't all. When asked how he paid for food and gas, Nolan said he used his dad's bank card. That changed everything. Because the receipt found at the cabin, the one from Taco Bell with 4 drinks, was also paid using Adam's card, unless Adam had multiple cards. The detective leaned in and told him that they know your dad took the Ford truck to the cabin. "We've seen the footage." But Nolan doubled down. He told them, "That's impossible. If he took the Ford, then how was the Dodge at the cabin? He couldn't have driven both." It was bold for a 16-year-old to challenge trained investigators like that. It almost made his lie sound real. After hours of questioning, they let him go. For now. But they took his fingerprints before he left. Then they called the bank. Adam Buchanan had only one card, and on September 12th at 3 a.m. that card was used at a bar called the Valencia Club. Later that same day it was used again, at a movie theater. That was the missing link. The person using the card was not Adam. Then came the break. Just before they could move forward with charges, something unexpected happened. In a field next to Buchanan Construction Company in Benicia, a group of kids were doing volunteer cleanup. That's when they found it. A woman's purse. Inside it were personal items and an ID card. Adam Buchanan's ID. And nearby, a .22 caliber rifle. Officers moved fast. They collected everything. Fingerprints. DNA. All of it pointed to Nolan. His prints were on the weapon. His DNA was on the items. It was over. On October 1st, 2015, Nolan Buchanan was arrested, right there at his high school in Benicia, California. But this wasn't the end of the story. This was the start of something else. A new chapter, one built on lies and manipulation, and it was just getting started. After his arrest, Nolan Buchanan was placed at the Juvenile Treatment Center in South Lake Tahoe. News that a 16-year-old had wiped out his entire family sent shockwaves through the community. This wasn't just any town. It happened in El Dorado County, one of the quietest areas in California. Low crime, tight-knit, safe. The reaction was immediate. People were angry, confused, demanding justice. And under that weight, prosecutors made a bold decision. They would charge Nolan as an adult. Not as a boy, not as a misguided teen, as a man who planned something cold and permanent. But before they could take the case to court, they needed the timeline to be airtight. Every second had to be accounted for. Investigators dug into the digital trail left behind, The transactions told the story. On September 11th, Adam, Molly, Nolan, and Gavin stopped at a fast food restaurant. They bought enough for 4. From there, they all headed to the cabin. Later, around 1 a.m. on September 12th, Adam and Molly were seen together. They were at their favorite spot, the Valencia bar. At 3 a.m., another charge was made on Adam's card: drinks. Then the couple was spotted again, heading back toward the cabin. Roughly 30 minutes later, that same Ford truck was seen again, but this time only one person was inside: Nolan. He was driving away from the cabin, alone. That final detail snapped the timeline into place. It was all the prosecution needed to argue this wasn't spontaneous. It was first degree, deliberate, planned. With the timeline complete, they were confident the case was solid. Everyone believed Nolan had no defense. But they were wrong. Because when the trial began, Nolan and his attorney, Lori London, came armed with a version of events that would throw everything into chaos. A story no one expected, and a defense built to shake the foundation of the case. On May 17, 2018, Nolan Buchanan stood trial. The case was heard at El Dorado County Superior Court in South Lake Tahoe, California. Presiding was Judge Suzanne Kingsbury. The room was silent as defense attorney Lori London rose to speak. She told the story from Nolan's side. He wasn't guilty. He wasn't a monster. He was a son who had survived the unthinkable. According to Nolan, his father Adam lost control that night. He said Adam had poured gasoline throughout the cabin, that he turned on his family. Nolan claimed his father ended Molly's life, then Gavin's. In the dark confusion, he said he didn't realize his father had shot Gavin. He said all he saw was his brother collapse. And in that chaos, Nolan claimed he fought his father for the rifle. He pulled the trigger. Afterward, he said he ran to Gavin, held him, then fled the cabin in shock as flames began to spread. His defense pointed to the layout of the bodies. They weren't together. They were scattered, which matched his version. They also used Molly's journals, page after page describing the strain inside the home. Her words painted Adam as controlling, angry, a man cracking under pressure. It was a powerful narrative, but the prosecution was ready. Before they explained what really happened inside the cabin, they had to destroy Nolan's story first. And that didn't take long. First, yes, they were found in different places. But Nolan ignored one key fact. The cabin had collapsed. The fire had shifted everything. Where the remains were found didn't prove where they had fallen. Second, Nolan said he cradled his brother's body. But the autopsy told another story. Gavin had suffered major blood loss. If Nolan had truly held him in his final moments, his clothes would have been soaked. But the clothes he wore that night were found at home. Not a drop of blood. Third, the shot. Nolan said his father fired during a struggle, a fast, chaotic moment. But the medical examiner's report said something else. The bullet had entered Gavin's skull at a clean 45-degree angle. A perfect downward shot. Not from a scuffle, but from someone standing over him while he was lying down. In just a few strikes, the defense crumbled. This wasn't panic. It wasn't self-defense. Now the prosecution was ready to tell the real story. What happened that night inside the cabin, and why it wasn't about fear. It was about greed. Nolan Buchanan stood to inherit everything. The land, the business, the money. If no one found out what he'd done, it would all be his. Investigators uncovered what he'd told his grandfather more than once. That he and his father were just managing things. That they needed to handle the company better. Fix the debt. Make smarter choices. On September 11th, after the family arrived at the cabin, Adam and Molly left to go to their favorite bar. That's when Nolan made his move. He doused the cabin and the surrounding area in gasoline. Then he went to his younger brother. Gavin was sleeping, and Nolan ended his life. He waited. When Adam and Molly returned from the bar, he was ready. He fired again. Then he lit the match. By the time the fire took over the cabin, he was already gone, driving away in the Ford truck. The isolation of the area gave him a head start. The flames consumed everything before anyone noticed a thing. But what he didn't count on was how fast the truth would catch him. On June 13, 2018, Nolan Buchanan stood in court for sentencing. The jury was made up of 12 people, 5 women, 7 men. It took them only 2 hours to agree. Guilty. 3 counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances for committing multiple killings. Nolan Buchanan was given 150 years to life. He will be eligible for parole in 25. But the legacy he wanted to inherit is gone. The company, the name, the family, burned away. And the boy who tried to take it all now has nothing left but time, and a story that still leaves people asking, how does someone become capable of this? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime documentaries. See you in the next video.